Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the April 15th Urban Village Development Commission meeting. Hopefully it won't be too taxing for you. Sorry, had to do it. That's exactly the kind of return I expected. Thank you.
We're going to begin auditing your jokes anytime now.
All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. See, I need to get everybody smiling, right? What is commission roster? Is this the sheet we're talking about, Lucy? It showed up again last week, I think, or last meeting.
I think our staff person that puts together the UVDC packet just added that in there for the public's use in case they wanted to know the members of the commission. I think it's just a supplemental informational piece, kind of providing a little bit of background about the commission and who's on it.
All right, great. Let's go ahead into the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. And any questions or concerns, edits? Yes, Michael.
Just on page 7 of 27, it says beard wall between parcels 7 and 8 where it states 700 feet. Why would I guess we just add fences be built there? So, or whatever you want.
Oh, I see.
Anything. Whatever you want.
Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
The sentence wasn't finished, basically.
4 paragraphs up from the bottom.
Yeah. Okay, anything else? No? Okay.
Can I correct my own comments?
Can you do what, sorry?
Can I correct my own comments that were in the report?
I don't know. If they're incorrect, I'd rather them be correct. So, you want to do that in public comment section?
I think I'd rather have them written.
Okay.
I have them written.
Your corrections?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, you can
Bring them on
just, at some point, give them to us, and we'll.
Thank you.
The recording secretary?
Or Mike.
Jim. Okay. All right. So, anything else? Thank you. Okay.
So I move we approve the meetings from April 1st, 2014.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thanks. All right, Lucy?
So I've handed out, again, the tool that we've been using to give you guys some support about the kind of permit you're looking for and what the criteria are. Tonight you're reviewing a preliminary plat. This is the public hearing for the plat. You're acting in a quasi-judicial manner, which means if you've had any ex parte conversations outside of the chamber, or you have a vested interest in the outcome of this, you need to declare that. Anyone have anything they'd like to declare? So the plat is predominantly to subdivide property. It is a planning and land use action. And there are there's both a state law criteria and a city regulation criteria. We're going to be going into more detail about this at the May 6th training session that we'll be holding. There should be an invitation going out for that soon. So I want to speak to the audience because I recognize some of you as members of the Talus community. Some of you may be here to speak to the issue of tree cutting that happened last week. We do have a public comment section, and you are, of course, welcome to speak. I do want you to be aware that this is a planning permit, which predominantly has to do with subdividing property, and that some of the comments that we have seen during the email exchanges I've had with the community are regarding things that would be more appropriately dealt with through construction conditions. So you're welcome to make those comments. The applicant and staff will hear those. They won't be part of what the commission rules on because construction level issues are not part of the plat. But they will be part of the record, and they would be considered by staff at the time that we are implementing them, as long as we can, we have a basis in the city code. So I just wanted to set that framework so expectations are set.
Thank you, Lucy. All right, let's move on to the preliminary plat of Talus parcels 7 to 9, PP 14-00001. Mike.
Good evening. My name is Mike Martin. I'm an associate planner with the city, and I'm just going to orient everyone how we're going to go through this. So we had our previous public meeting on April 1st where we presented the staff report. At that time, we had questions and comments that came up at the meeting, as well as some written comments. And the way we've been doing this with the UVDC is to have a second public hearing. Everyone's everyone's able to speak tonight. If you want to speak, we ask that you please sign up there on the sign-in sheet with your name and address, and we'll have a chance for public comment following the presentation. But the purpose tonight really is to package all of the comments and concerns that we've heard throughout the permitting process and provide a response, both from the city and the applicant, J.R. Hayes. Their engineer here is Triad and Associates. And the way I want to do this tonight is kind of co-present. The way the briefing response memo is laid out, which is what I'm presenting, I'll be taking the lead and I'll be identifying the issues. And then in some instances, I'll ask that Ryan come up and provide additional information as needed. So jumping right in, if you can follow along with the briefing response memo. I realize some of the members of the public here don't have that, but we've broken it down into about 13 responses. The first one being walls. And walls is one of the big issues that we've heard from the community, so we wanted to tackle that one first. This is a slide from the previous hearing, or meeting rather, and it's just an overview of kind of what we're dealing with. Again, the site has a lot of topography, sloping from down in parcel 9 kind of upwards. The numbers there represent elevations, so you can kind of see the way the topo is working up to the right there. Several types of walls here. We have some rock walls in green, fill walls in the red, and then terraced walls in the purple. And we'll get a little bit into that later. One of the walls that we're aware of where people are concerned is the wall on the bottom there. That's the tallest and longest of the walls, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So let me identify some of the concerns that we've heard. Walls are not in line with the goals and guidelines. Walls should not be climbable. Are the walls stable? How will trees affect the wall integrity? And some additional discussion about who's going to own and maintain these walls. Speaking to the goals and guidelines, I think a big part of that concern came from the aesthetics of these walls. And to address those, we've amended some conditions. That's inaccurate, sorry. We have one additional condition which I'm going to outline at the end of the wall presentation, but I wanted to highlight these two conditions that are in the plat that deal with walls and the aesthetics of walls. And number 7, design terraced walls shown in plat to allow and encourage landscaping from below, between, and above the terrace walls. This will be reviewed with the site work permit for walls and the landscape permit. So that one's getting at adding landscape and vegetation around the walls to reduce their visibility and better integrate them into the site. Number 8 is a summary. It's a little longer. I won't read the whole condition, but basically it says, where it is not practical to terrace walls, long and or tall walls will be articulated, add visual interest to the community, and use landscape to soften the wall and transition the scale of the wall where pedestrians are nearby. This one's getting it again, probably, it's applicable to all the walls, but this one's really getting after the bigger wall in parcel 7. So what we're proposing, what the applicant's proposing, what this condition would require would be articulation and additional landscaping, including trees along the base of that wall where there's also a trail.
Mike, can I make a comment on your proposed number 7?
Yes.
On the second line where it says to allow and encourage landscaping from, below, between, and above.
So, go ahead. That's for terraced walls.
Okay, it's just the English isn't working. There needs to be to view or encourage access or something. There's a word missing somewhere in there if you
Let me make
carefully.
sure I transcribed it right from the actual condition.
At least that's the way my brain's processing
So,
it. Do you guys see the same
I'm just
thing?
going to read the condition as it is in the staff report, which is the official version. From the staff report, design terraced walls shown in the plat to allow and encourage landscaping from below, between, and above the terraced walls. This will be reviewed with the site work permit for walls and with the landscape permit.
Okay, I'm working on it.
Thanks, Lucy.
Okay, we can come back to that. Should the walls be climbable? No, they shouldn't, and we'll address this with the construction permits. Ryan and his staff will take a look at stability of walls and how trees will affect wall integrity, and then I'll come back and cycle back to maintenance of walls. But I'm going to turn it over to Ryan here just to talk a little bit more about their proposal. And this is Ryan Coleman from Triad and Associates.
Thanks, Mike. Ryan Coleman, Triad Associates, 12112 115th Avenue Northeast, in Kirkland, Washington. I'm going to pass the buck and have our geotechnical engineer come up and talk about the stability of walls. Basically, she's going to talk about, I'll do a quick overview. To build walls within Talus, especially within areas that have steep slopes, there's a critical area review. And part of that review is a geotechnical study that is written, that analyzes the design and the structure of the wall, the existing condition of the slope, and the post-construction condition of the wall and the stability of the slope kind of combined together as one mechanical geotechnical unit. So I'd like to introduce Carolyn Decker from Terra Associates, and she'll talk a little bit about kind of how that geotechnical aspect helps.
I'm Carolyn Decker with Terra Associates. So when it comes to the stability of the walls, particularly these walls, we look at 3 different factors. One of the first things we look at is the global stability. These are very tall slopes. They're very steep. We want to make sure that what we do isn't going to decrease the level of safety in those walls and decrease the level of stability in those slopes. So what you do in the critical areas report is you do a slope stability analysis, and that looks at the overall stability of this slope in its current condition using the information we gain from our test pits, our test borings, all of our subsurface exploration, existing geological maps that gives us a really good idea of what those soils look like. And then we use those to create parameters that we put into a computer program that tells us, okay, the slopes are stable. After we've established the existing conditions, we go ahead and we say, okay, now we're going to build these really tall walls. We're going to impact, we're going to change the loading. What happens? Are we going to make it worse or are we going to make it better? And then, so that's one level of safety and one level of stability that we come up with. Then we go in and we actually look at the walls themselves. And we look at them from the global stability of the wall. And you've got the facing of the wall, which can be any sort of modular block. And then you've got the grid themselves. And you look at that in a global sense of the wall. And then you actually take it one step further. And you have a stability factor within the grid itself, which you've got different levels of safety that you reduce the amount of strength that grid is allowed to use to resist any sort of forces that are being imposed. So when you take all of these 3 combined factors, you actually get a very conservative wall design that is very stable, and it works really quite well in the area. Thank you.
I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but I have a question about the maintenance of the walls. Would you be the right person to ask, and would this be the right time to ask that question?
Eric, I'm going to tackle that one after Ryan talks a little bit more.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Yeah.
This question is in regards to stability assessment. And so it's a what-if question. During your assessment process, what if you identify an issue with the stability of the existing slope? What countermeasures or mitigation process do you put in place to address that?
If we find that there's an existing condition out there, we would look at ways to stabilize the slope. We would look at using rock anchors or some other stability measures that are typically used in geotechnical engineering. And then we would also look at, okay, it's going to slide. Where is it going to slide? Is it a shallow surface slide? Is it a deep-seated failure? You know, is this something that we really need to be concerned about, or is it something that through the grading process is just going to go away, which a lot of times, most of the instability we see is shallow surface failures that simply go away by grading.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Jim?
Thanks. Just a quick question as to I'm trying to figure out the entire process timeline, but, you know, let's say you've done your global stability analysis, even, you know, we've looked at the walls that are going to be constructed. Are you consulted after the fact? Let's say now we've constructed the wall. There might be a process in terms of, you know, hiding the wall, putting trees up, putting, you know, plants over the wall, et cetera, et cetera. Are you consulted again in the process to make sure that the integrity of the wall hasn't been compromised in some way, or is there kind of a disconnect there?
No, we are, if there is any changes to that wall, anything anyone wants to do, any planting, we've got a very good relationship with the landscape architect, and we're always in communication, because the last thing anyone wants is the integrity of these walls to be compromised by plantings. So we're aware of them, and we discuss it with them, and we make sure that the plants that are installed aren't going to destabilize these walls.
How long do your walls, what's the life of the wall?
Standard design is a 50-year lifespan. They can certainly be designed for longer. Most walls that are designed stand longer than 50 years.
Okay, so then I think now my maintenance question comes in, so I'll wait.
Okay.
One more question, Jeff.
Go ahead.
So I'm curious, you talked about doing core samples. How deep do those core samples go, and what area does that encompass? Is it the entire property that will be evaluated?
We've looked at the entire, all of parcels 7, 8, and 9, and actually yesterday and today we went out and did additional exploration in the areas of the walls, because we wanted to make sure we knew what was in those areas, where we were going to get down to a stable foundation, because that is so critical with walls of this height.
Okay, so you did do all the parcels?
All the parcels, yes.
And then you dig down to find a stable base. Is that how deep the core samples go?
That's what we did yesterday and today. Typically when we go out, we are just looking to see what's out there. We want to find stable, solid ground. Most of our test pits that have been dug and the test borings that we've done, we have went until we found bedrock, because we know it's out there.
Okay.
And so we've dug down to find bedrock. One of our borings actually went through the bedrock so that we could determine the strength of that.
Okay, thank you.
Eric?
Yeah, I just have a question as far as the conditions that you're seeing here on this, on these parcels. Is there a rating, like say 1 through 10, would they rate it as an 8 as far as stability factor from what you see? I'm not sure what your ratings would be, but how do you judge the stability of what you're seeing on this property?
We judge it by standard engineering practices, and the practices, when you run your stability analysis, you want a factor of safety of 1.5 or greater. And that's what we found in the existing conditions out there on these sites. And and what we also look at when we go out and do our subsurface exploration, we're also doing site reconnaissance. We're looking around. We want to look for any signs of instability. Do you have trees that are bowed? Do you see tension cracking? Is there some way that we can look at this site and say we've got some sort of instability problems, and we have not seen that at all on these sites.
Thank you.
Tim?
You say you go down to bedrock. How deep is the bedrock that you've found?
The bedrock is anywhere from about 3 feet down to, I believe on one of them, it was 25 feet down.
And when you get to bedrock, is that where you choose to anchor the wall, or would some of the walls in a 25-foot depth be anchored shallower than that?
They can be. As long as the walls are sitting on what we consider a firm and stable base, that's perfectly acceptable for these walls to be have their foundations on. And we look at that on a wall-by-wall basis. The particularly tall wall in Parcel 7 will be founded on bedrock.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So one more thing I want to mention, after Tara goes through all of that design and analysis, and they present that in the critical area study to the city takes it through a review. They review it internally, and they send it out actually to 2 peer reviews, so 2 other professional geotechnical engineers that sort of check the work. So it's not that you have to rely on staff or anybody is expecting staff to review it at the same sort of technical expertise level. Staff farms that out to other consultants, and that's part of the application fee that is paid. I think we're gonna come back to maintenance. Is that what you wanted to talk about, Darren?
Actually, I just had a couple of other comments.
Okay, Darren's got a few things he wants to add.
Darren Pugh, J.R. Hayes and Sons and Talus Management Services. So, briefly, J.R. Hayes and Sons is not the owner. However, we will be the contractor, and we are somewhat related entities, but just kind of want to make that clarification. In addition to, we talked about some of the design parameters that are going in. I think there were some concerns raised about the amount of input that Tara would have during the process, and we can get to the maintenance component, but in addition to the design, they are also integral to the construction and the inspection of the construction of the walls for two reasons. One, we need to verify that the backfill material and the base materials are adequate throughout and are consistent with the test pits that we've done and test borings that we've done in those wall areas to conform to their design. They also have an Arizona emissions insurance, and so they are concerned with their wall design from that basis, and they want to make sure that the walls are constructed adequately as well. So there's a partnership between their design and our construction as it's being completed to verify both from the city, and the city's inspectors will also be out there, but the geotechnical engineer is really responsible through the construction process to confirm at the end of the day that the walls were constructed in compliance with their design. So I just want to make that point.
So I'm just going to add a few more things related to the walls. Carolyn did talk a little bit about how landscaping is integrated both through the construction and sometimes, oftentimes also through the design of the wall. They would recommend that there's like a no plant zone or a certain setback, especially from the top of the wall, so that landscaping doesn't pose a hazard. Mike talked a little bit about some of the different types of walls that are proposed for parcels 7, 8, and 9. This image here in the upper left-hand corner, this is from SR 900 looking up towards parcel 5D. The neighborhood name escapes me right now. Sorry about that. But mouse keeps going away. Basically, what you see here, this cleared area right here is actually where there's a utility easement coming down the hill. And this is really the only area where you can see that wall. That wall is about 35 feet tall. And this is a keystone block or an MSE type of wall, which is similar to the lower right-hand corner here. This is also at the bottom of 5D, and this is an area where you can see some coniferous trees have been planted at the base of the wall, or evergreen trees. So these are the typical sort of fill walls that you will see. These are typically reinforced with that grid type of mat system that Carolyn spoke about. And then the upper right-hand corner, this is where you would see an architectural treatment to a cut wall. So they would cut into the bedrock, and then they would actually use a stabilizing system called soil nails. Really interesting to watch it being constructed. They drive these long, basically really thick pieces of rebar back into the bedrock, and then they use another mechanically engineered sort of concrete face to stabilize the face of that rock wall. And then the proposal for parcel 7, 8, and 9 is to finish that with this sort of faux granite shotcrete finish. And as you can see over time, it takes on a little bit more of a natural appearance. You can landscape on top and in the bottom and between it. And as typical in our northwest area, it grows moss. And then this shot here down in the lower left-hand corner is parcel 6 right along Shangri-La Way, actually looking up towards where parcel 7 is. You can kind of see it. I think this photo may have been taken shortly after it had been logged up on top. So you can see even in the winter time, when the leaves have all come down off of those deciduous trees, there's still a fair amount of vegetation screening. And this is a cross-section taken from a very similar spot on Shangri-La Way looking up towards Parcel 7. And this is, you know, a one-to-one perspective, basically. So, you know, 1 foot horizontally is 1 foot vertically. And you can see how much topographic relief there is from Parcel 6 to Parcel 7. And this is the approximate wall height that's proposed, the intervening vegetation, and you can kind of start to get the sense that the amount of visibility of that wall face is going to be pretty minimal.
So before I close this up on walls, we did hear some concerns about ownership and maintenance of the wall. And in response, we have revised condition number 8. And it's a long one. I'll read it, since we don't have to read the whole lot of them like in the first meeting. Where it is not practical to terrace walls, long and or tall walls will be articulated, add visual interest to the community, and use landscape to soften the wall and transition the scale of the wall where pedestrians are nearby. For instance, at the base of the eastern wall in Parcel 7, landscaping, which includes the use of coniferous trees where feasible, shall be placed between the base of the wall and the trail in order to reduce the wall's scale and presence to pedestrians. And then this is the part we added in response to the HOA ownership and maintenance questions. In addition, walls must be 1, owned and maintained by the Talus Homeowners Association, an election by the Homeowners Association, or 2, owned and maintained by a sub-HOA that meets the city standards for financial viability, or 3, by another group or organization with the ability to access and assess individual lots for the protection, preservation, and eventual replacement of the walls. Consideration must be given to and demonstrated on the wall design plans that a method for the eventual replacement of the walls is accommodated in the wall design and the available property above and below the wall. This will be enforced during the wall permits with the landscape permit. So, in short, we've added a little bit of clarification into the condition. I think it's our expectation that the Talus Homeowners Association will accept the walls. If they elected not to, we have some other provisions in there that would assure that the walls would be owned and maintained by likely a sub-HOA who would be responsible for maintaining those walls. Carl, you look like you have a question.
You may.
Thanks for being so observant, Mike. What has the city's history been with walls? How have they performed compared to what the expectations were? I'm thinking of along I-90, Home Depot, other locations.
Dan, do you want to take that one?
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Carl. Dan Irvin, City of Issaquah, MDRT. I'm not sure I can be very definitive in that answer because I don't have a complete background and understanding of all of the walls and all of the history in the city. Some of the walls that have been, I think, at the forefront of people's minds lately, though, specifically the walls behind Home Depot and the walls behind the apartment buildings that sit behind Albertsons, which have had some recent problems with them. Those walls were designed by and built in King County, not in the city and under the jurisdiction of the city. And the city's public works director and I had a fairly lengthy sit down about what was happening to each of those walls, the purpose of which was to identify if the mechanisms there that were contributing to the instability of the walls could happen under our process and today with our current standards. And we both concluded that it would not, that if either of those walls had been built in the city today, the problems that are manifesting themselves there now would have been caught either in the design review or in the construction implementation through monitoring and inspection. So I'm not sure I can answer very much more of your question on what's the rest of the history with the walls, but in those 2 walls we've researched those fairly carefully because of this topic and are confident that that wouldn't happen in Talus under this situation.
Thank you.
Michael?
This is a question for the city. I'm looking at in addition, walls must with condition 1 and 2 there. The way I see that is we're basically presenting the Talus Homeowners Association the decision to accept the maintenance of the walls or to splinter off or to not accept the walls and create a new HOA in that area. So my overall question goes to the overall Talus development agreement. Does it account for sub-HOAs? Is that even something that you can do in the Talus agreement?
Sorry? Yeah.
In terms of HOAs, the development agreement doesn't really consider that. I'm pulling a little bit from my background when I was with the city and working through the development agreement. That's more of a sort of a private thing that the master developer would work through. But to kind of get into your question a little bit more, whether it was the Talus Residential Association or a sub-parcel specific association, those can be created as separate and even I'll say somewhat commingled entities. So you can assign certain maintenance responsibilities to certain areas and to certain entities underneath. So it's sort of like there'd be the umbrella association would be the residential association. There could be additional associations set up underneath that.
Okay. I mean, that
So
seems fair, but I just think there might be some other language in the agreement.
So I just want to add something because I actually looked it up today, so I have the advantage. It required that there be a residential HOA of all residences and then a commercial HOA. And part of the reason we put that in the development agreement is just that we found that's the most successful format. In terms of sub-HOAs, that is, Ryan's absolutely right, that's left up to the discretion of different residential areas. Sometimes they like being set up that way, some builders do and some builders don't. Part of the reason that we identified HOAs is because, as we understand it, there are state regulations that require reserves to be built up to replace, to anticipate and account for replacement of various facilities. So that's a.
So is that a method for? So we see that at the bottom there. That a method for eventual replacement. Is method talking about financial means, or is that an engineering means to do that?
That was engineering means. The reason that the HOA was identified is because that is a financial means.
So are we saying that whatever wall we build here will have to be a replaceable type wall, or it could be repaired over time?
Right, and Dan has, in the past, talked about other walls at Talus, that the plans identify the same kind of method and means and space to replace the walls.
Okay.
Lots of questions. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I just, so I'd like to know currently, there's obviously already some walls in Talus. Does that HOA, does the Talus HOA cover those walls currently? And I'd also like to know what's involved in maintenance of the walls. And I think earlier they said the walls will last 50 years or more. So at some point, I'm guessing maintenance of the walls is including inspections. How costly are those inspections? And at some point, the inspection will determine the wall needs to be replaced. What is even involved in that? I can't see that in my mind right now, replacing a wall if that's the case. A lot of questions.
Yeah, there are 3 questions.
I'm sorry about that.
So the first, I was involved in the original master infrastructure where there were significant walls that hold up all the roads out there. In addition, throughout the development, there's good size MSE walls, very similar to the one being proposed in Parcel 7. And we thought long and hard about it, whether there should be, sub-associations for the individual walls or if they should be a part of the overall HOA. And we decided that since there were were walls everywhere and that there were going to be more walls in the future, that it made sense in the final plat, in definition, to have the wall be owned by the HOA. So throughout 5A, 5C, 5D, throughout all the wall system where walls fall outside of the right-of-way, it's owned by the HOA currently. And that's what we were anticipating in this case. But again, the city's correct. The HOA would need to choose to accept these walls, or a separate HOA could be formed at the direction of the developer. As a part of the final plat process, you can create a separate HOA as a part of this plat. So that was question one. Question two had to do with
Maintenance of the walls.
maintenance of the walls, right. Darren, could you just speak to what's gone on up to this point?
Through the history of Talus, which goes well further back than my involvement in 2007, and as Al said, all of the walls currently are under the HOA control. And part of that was giving the HOA the ability long-term, even after potentially the master developer is gone, to have control and maintenance abilities for those walls. That was kind of the premise of why it was done that way, as opposed to having them on individual lots or on individual parcels. And that way the homeowners association in total could have some control over what happened with those. That is likely how this would have happened had we not elected to turn the HOA over to the homeowners. Given the duration of this process, several years ago, we elected to turn the homeowners association actually over to the homeowners themselves. We could have elected to keep control of that, but we really didn't want to make decisions for the homeowners association at that point in time for their community, because we weren't really, there was only a couple of parcels left. So we made a determination at that time to turn it over to the residents and the homeowners association and not control that process. This is one of those items that now comes back, that they now have an election as the homeowners association to review what their obligations may be, what those maintenance issues are, and determine whether it's in their best interest to control that or not control that. And so that's a secondary discussion that we'll be having with them as to how they would like to proceed on these walls. Again, just to reiterate, all of the other walls within Talus are under the control of the homeowners association at this point in time. So this would be kind of if they didn't accept them, this would be outside of what the norm is. From a maintenance perspective, at least while we were in control, and I believe that the homeowners association is still doing this, they have an independent consultant, which I believe was Golder, and I believe still is Golder and Associates, which is a geotechnical firm as well, similar to Terra and Associates, and they do an annual wall inspection of all the walls within Talus and provide them with a condition report and maintenance recommendations for all the walls. Most of the maintenance recommendations that I've seen in the time that I've been involved are really related to the drainage that's put in behind the walls and making sure that those drains are kept clean so that they don't get clogged and cause damage via water collecting where it's not designed to collect, and those kinds of things, and or vegetation or alders that may grow up next to the base or at the top of the wall that may be a hindrance to the performance of the wall, and that those get maintained through annually through the process of the maintenance, landscaping maintenance, and generally those are the types of maintenance that we've seen. There's been no long-term maintenance and no long-term failure of any of the walls that have been put into Talus that I'm aware of to date. Any other questions?
Thank you. Did you get your questions answered, Eric? Yeah.
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. Jim?
7 out of 8.
Just a few clarifications. First of all of the homes in this development will still fall under the Talus HOA. We're just talking about the maintenance and the ownership of the walls here, if there's a separate HOA.
Correct.
Okay. Number two, I'm asking this for Michael, actually. Is seismic stability also, is that part of the global stability? Okay, thank you. Let's see. And then any CC&Rs that come out of this, are they tied into the sales process so that anybody buying will know about this? And
I would defer that.
CC&Rs are recorded as part of the plat, and so a homeowner's title insurance policy would show all of that.
so we hope title does a good job on that and identifies. And then are any of, I'm looking at number 3 in particular, if this is not part of the Talus HOA, the ownership, is there any kind of bonding for these walls?
So I'm not sure 3 is fully unpacked. 3 was added in to give us the latitude to come up with a third possible solution.
There's got to be.
And that sets the criteria of that. And bonding certainly could be a component of that. But at the end of the day, the city's going to look to make sure that the walls will be maintained, that the entity that assumes the walls has the financial wherewithal to do that. And I guess that's kind of the impetus of number 3.
So it's implied that if number 3 is the direction that we go with, at least initially, that there will be bonding? Because in this case, I just see if something happens.
If the Talus HOA did not accept the walls and the master developer elected not to develop a sub HOA, I think 3 then sets the criteria for which we would have to have a real discussion about how these walls are going to be owned and maintained and the criteria therefore in. Certainly bonding is likely to be part of that process, but not having done it yet, it's hard to say what that would look like.
Okay, fair
But
enough.
I think it's our expectation that either the Talus HOA would accept the walls or a sub HOA would be created. I think it's unlikely that number 3 would come into play, but we have it there and some framework by which we can have a discussion.
Okay. Eric, back to you real quick.
I just want to clarify for sub-HOA, I think the standard up in Talus, and I think the Issaquah Highlands is similar to this, that each subdivision or isolated neighborhood has their own HOA. Sometimes that HOA will elect to join the larger Talus HOA. So then I think when you say sub-HOA, that's what you're talking about. Is
Right.
that correct?
So again, all the homes will be part of the greater Talus Homeowners Association. And you're right, in Issaquah Highlands and Talus, some of the individual subdivisions might have their own HOA. They might want a higher level of maintenance than is afforded by the parent HOA. They've elected to do that, they can do that. That type of sub-HOA would be, in essence, the same as what we're talking about here.
So I think that would be the standard for this new development, that there will be a sub-HOA for this new development. And then so if the Talus HOA elects not to take these walls in their responsibility, then the developer will more likely just tack that onto the HOA for that subdivision.
I don't know if it's accurate to say there will likely be a sub-HOA. I don't know how common the
If you look
sub-HOAs
under
are.
precedents of what you see now, I would assume that.
It's very possible. And again, if the parent HOA, the Talus HOA, elects not to accept the walls, then yes, that'd be accurate.
Okay.
Then the sub HOA would be responsible.
Well, it would be a sub HOA. It wouldn't necessarily be that one,
a sub HOA.
right? I mean, so it could be something else that is created, I imagine, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
I was going to propose we move along. We have a lot of
Yeah.
items, but I don't want to. I want to hear everyone's comments and concerns.
I know Tim has a question. You have a quick one? No? Okay. Scott, do you have a quick one? All right.
Just on the topic, seismic was brought up a moment ago, right? And I guess the question that I have in regards to the elevation of this highest wall being 50 feet, what is the seismic rating or seismic tolerance for a wall of that elevation?
So I think we're into a level of technical review that is governed by codes and laws. And, you know, I appreciate that we want to have a level of confidence, especially after current events. But I think we may not know that level of technical expertise off the top of our heads. And it, I'm sure, is governed by codes.
Okay, perfect.
So.
Understood.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on.
Okay. 2 of 13. They won't all be this long.
He put the hard one first, hopefully.
So the second one came around tract I. One of the questions that was asked was who would own the tracks, and the answer to that is I think there's 16 or 19 tracks in this proposal. All of them, with the exception of tract I, would be owned by the Talus HOA, assuming they accept ownership. Tract I is the one exception to that, and that with this plat will be dedicated to the city. So if this gets approved ultimately, that would become city property. And a couple of things that have been identified for a possible use there. One is a sustainable building project, a la Z-Home in Talus, or in Highlands rather. And then the second, and probably more likely scenario, would be that space would be retained by the city for open space and probably a more passive use. At this time, the city hasn't determined what's going to happen with that parcel. So the applicants met the threshold for the requirement of this plat in that they've provided the space to the city, which is their obligation as part of this process.
So the city could turn that into open space in 20 years from now or 3 years from now, do a project on there?
The area is identified for, again, a sustainability project or some type of open space.
But it's just designated as TBD, basically?
Yes.
Okay. And what,
TBD between those two uses.
between those two, what would be the point putting in a parcel or a project like Z Homes at a fully built-out development like this where you don't expect any sort of extraneous traffic?
So I think the dedication of Tract I goes back to the first major amendment to the Talus Development Agreement, of which I wasn't a part, so I don't understand it, the full understanding of it, but one of the options as part of that was that Tract I would be dedicated, and those two uses were identified in that process, and that was vetted by the City Council.
Okay. It's
Yeah.
kind of out of place.
Darren, please.
I was involved in the major amendment when we did that. I think really what it amounted to was at the time Z-Home was kind of in its inception and going into a construction phase, and it was a popular idea that was being fostered within the city and within Issaquah Highlands, and it was kind of one of those things from the city's perspective that kind of got put in there as an option to be able to look at doing that. It certainly wasn't from the master developer's perspective. It was more something that, depending on how successful maybe that was in the Highlands, that this might be an opportunity to do something similar, and I think that's really where it came from.
Okay.
Well, and there was also a tradition of, before Z-Home, there was one, if not two, idea houses at Issaquah Highlands. So I understand your question in terms of whether that would be someplace that you would want to attract visitors as the kind of idea house. On the other hand, I guess the city does see value in demonstration projects and needs places to be able to do that if they choose to do so.
So just, I know this is not going to change this decision, but just my 2 cents, it kind of feels like we're putting in what appears to be a sustainable house to make us feel better about cutting down 15 acres of trees. And that's kind of how I see this. So my whole neighborhood Greenbelt got wiped out this week, so I'm a little sensitive. So
I just want to ask, whatever the city finally decides to do with this Tract I, will there be any notification to Talus residents, and will the Talus residents have any input? Will they have an opportunity to voice their opinions as far as what goes on with that tract in the future?
So, no process has been identified yet for how they'll make a decision. If there was, with either use, some kind of administrative site development permit would be required, which would require notification to neighbors and therefore an opportunity to review and comment on the proposal. So that would be after that the city had made that decision. I know that when I have talked preliminarily with the director of the Office of Sustainability and the Parks Director, and I think that there is an interest in doing some outreach, but there's been nothing officially established.
Thanks, Lucy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any others?
Oh, let's move on.
Traffic and roads. So I'm going to try to push forward. I know we have a lot of people that want to speak tonight. So the concerns we've identified, do roads have sufficient capacity? The answer is yes. The roads have sufficient capacity now, and they will have unused capacity assuming full project build out for parcel 789. Who will own and maintain the streets? I'm going to jump ahead to this slide. All of the streets in the proposal, which to this doesn't look like many, but it actually is, will be privately owned, with the exception of the one shown in red. Most of this one in red, if you could follow along, is the Shangri-La Way extension, and it loops back up. That's proposed to be publicly owned, as well as the extension here of Road A, which leads to 3 dead ends, which is another question, comment, concern that we had. Why are we allowing dead ends in Talus? One of the goals of Talus is to have connectivity between uses. It gets a little bit more difficult on the project perimeter and when you add in a lot of topography to make these connections. And in this case, the city has allowed, or approved rather, a few dead ends. The first being here at parcel 8. The road here at parcel 8 serves 7 parcels and it dead ends. Another dead end at the end of Shangri-La Way. And then third, the proposal as it is now shows a dead end street at the northern part of the parcel. Let's go back here. So there were some questions about the featured, go ahead.
If you could go back to that previous slide, Mike. So especially for the 2 long ones, is there some type of turnaround capacity there so that when people are getting to the end, they're not using driveways and
Yeah, so
lawns?
it's really hard to see on this, but if you look here, there's like a hammerhead. All these turnarounds are designed so that a fire truck can maneuver and make a turnaround.
Thank
so
you.
a car certainly would be able to. But getting back to the one at the end of parcel 7, we kind of described it as a future connection to the existing parcels. And I have another slide on the potential annexation, and that's slide 10, and I'm going to cover a lot of this then. But one of these dead ends did end up there. And I guess the bottom line right now is that for that road to be extended would require a council action. And the extension of this road outside of this parcel isn't part of this process. So the road does go to the northern part, and it's necessary to provide access as the houses literally go to the edge of the northern boundary here. Number 4 had a question about sidewalk removal from one of the Talus residents, and I think there was a little bit of confusion. I think the person might have thought we were talking about removing existing sidewalks in the project, and that's not the case. What we have approved in a few select locations is a removal of what would be newly constructed sidewalks on one half of the street, and we've done this to limit grading in certain locations, or where there's not, in any instance where we've removed a sidewalk, there's no homes on the other side or no direct recreation opportunities or things like that. So the pedestrian connectivity isn't really interrupted. In some places, there will just be one sidewalk instead of 2 on both sides of the street. Tracks and open spaces. Concerns we have: who will own and maintain the tracks within this plat? Again, that would be the Talus Homeowners Association, assuming they accept them. And again, that process happens through the final plat. What is being done about invasive plant species? I'll talk a little bit about some new and revised conditions that we've added to address that, as well as the logged areas. Speaking to the logged areas, everything that's been previously logged will be revegetated. And to get to that, I've added here new condition 27. Any previously cleared land shall be replanted with native, non-invasive trees and plants prior to the acceptance of open space and recreation tracts by the Talus Homeowners Association. Additionally, the applicant must prepare a plan for the removal and prevention of established invasive plant species within the open space areas. The city must approve the plan, and it must be implemented prior to the acceptance of any open space and recreation tracts. And there's one slight amendment. The red where it says "and prevention" was an add-in based on a comment we received that looks at not only removing the invasives but addressing that issue over time. And that's something that we'll look at in the plan that is prepared. So thank you, David, for that comment. It's in red, so we'll have to read that one with the motion because it is a little bit different than what's provided in the briefing memo. Michael.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just want to make sure I'm reading this clearly here. So the talks about the open space and recreation tracts will be accepted by the Talus Homeowners Association. So this work will be done, and before it is accepted by it, not the work will be done by the Talus Homeowners Association.
The work will be done before it is accepted by the Talus Homeowners
Okay.
Association.
Thank you.
Is it not reading that way?
It is. I'm just not
Okay.
a very clear reader.
I actually had a quick question on that too. I can't tell if it says, acceptance of open space and recreation tracts by the Talus homeowners, and then in the last sentence it says the city must approve the plan.
Okay, so before the Talus Homeowners Association accepts the tracts, the open space tracts, the developer has to prepare a plan which will be reviewed and approved by the city to address the invasives, which is the revegetation. So we're going to look at that plan. They're going to implement that plan, or at least get it started. It's probably a long-term plan. And then we're going to make sure that they're getting going on that before we'll allow them to turn it over to the homeowners.
But doesn't the Talus Homeowners Association really need to approve the plan too, since they're going to be accepting it?
Well, they have their own criteria for what they accept. We're just adding this in because we know it's important to the community. I mean, certainly they have their own criteria for which they accept a tract, but we want to make sure that they're getting what they're getting is in a good state.
So, if we do have a sub-HOA here, is that sub-HOA originally going to be comprised of the owner, like the owner or developer, as we've seen before?
I think it's pretty highly unlikely that we'd have a sub-HOA on these larger open space tracts. I don't think that's something we've typically seen.
Okay.
And again, that, with the final plat, we have to receive a letter from the HOA that they accept the tracts. And if they didn't, for whatever reason, we would have a problem and we would not be able to approve the final plat. So it's something that will get dealt with later on as well.
Okay.
I don't want you to get hung up because of the sub-HOA thing in the walls. That's kind of a more sensitive issue. This, I think, is a little bit more straightforward. I don't want to speak for the HOA, but typically that's not been a problem. And then to just add on to this, we've added revised condition 54. I've changed this a little bit. And I apologize, this one's not showing legislatively, but I'll read it. Any tract in this plat whose primary purpose is open space and which has been cleared shall be landscaped to prevent erosion and enhance the overall appearance of the community. Landscaping shall include trees, shrubs, and hydro-seeded ground cover mix. Trees selected shall either not be tall at maturity or shall be located to frame rather than block views. You can't see the change there. What it was a matter of semantics. I had trees kind of looped in with the hydro seed mix, and trees and shrubs wouldn't be included in that, so I just reworked it. Thank you, David. Any others? recreation areas. What is the usable flat area of Tract O? That was one of the questions. Triad ran the numbers, and the ballpark is about 3,250 square feet. I think, yeah, they said that's about 130 feet long by 20 to 30 feet wide. So that should be a fairly usable space. And again, just for reference, I added this little map. The Tract O, that's actually, oh, this one's Tract O, right there at the end of the wall. What recreation elements will be provided within the various spaces? That's a little bit outside the purview of a plat. We look at it to make sure that the feel of it and the general, that the space provided will allow a variety of uses that fit in with the community. But as to specific elements, we're not necessarily looking at that. If the applicant would like to talk about what they plan to do, we can certainly listen. A third concern we had was balls flying over the wall. Great, it was a great concern, and a little bit outside of the purview, but it's definitely something that we'll take into consideration with the construction permits. Look for solutions there. Do you want to add anything?
Regarding the amenities, for some of the more active spaces that are proposed with this plat, we kind of walked you guys through some of the ideas a couple weeks ago, and then that information was handed out again, so I don't want to go through that again. It was fun, but if anybody has any other questions or thoughts or ideas, I'd be more than happy to respond to those.
Thank you.
Moving right along. Again, just these are where the open space areas are proposed. They have the hill climb walk in parcel 9, the vault lid park, if that's what we want to call it, in kind of between 8 and 9, and then Tract O, which we just described, and then a smaller area here in parcel 7. Trails. Just to get everyone reoriented, they're proposing 2 types of trails, a neighborhood trail and then a forest path. The forest path is typically about 4 feet in width. It can vary depending on site and topography. And then the neighborhood trail is a little bit wider. It's 12 feet. And that's primarily provided through the hill climb walk, which will be a lot of stairs and such. And then there's also some neighborhood trail going up to the vault lid, just to get you guys oriented there. We had a lot of questions and concerns about trails. Will trails outside of Talus be brought up to standard? The answer to that is no. Anything outside of Talus wouldn't be in the jurisdiction of the city or Talus. So that's kind of a King County thing, and I'm working with one of the ladies from King County to try to talk about ways that we can integrate the 2 trail systems. Who will own and maintain the trails? Again, these are all in the open space tract, so those would go to the HOA. Is public access allowed? Yes, public access will be provided across all the trails with the final plat. How will steps be constructed? We have a detail for that in the development agreement, so it's kind of a timber framing with gravel in the middle. There's a couple different details, so the steps would be verified for conformance with the construction plans to make sure that they match the standard. How many feet of trails? I asked that one, and they estimated about 2,600 feet. Wayfinding signage will be required. It's a construction condition. And then this one kind of came up after the meeting, but the potential for new trails. I think there's interest in having potentially a connection, and north is to the right. Oh, sorry. North is that way. There's been talk about the possibility of a future trail linking, is this parcel 6?
Yeah.
Linking parcel 6 up to this connection. And I think that would be even more important in the event that an annexation ever occurred. And the question was, what can we do to make sure that that's a possibility in the future? And that would be certainly possible due to the access that will be provided across that track with the final plat. So there would be public access automatically as part of that track to accommodate a future trail should one be proposed. Any other questions on trails? Western buffer modifications. The question was, why are water reservoirs and retaining walls shown within the western 50-foot wide vegetative buffer? I'll just kind of show you. This line here represents a vegetative buffer that was included in the original development agreement. Back in 2004, some reservoirs were permitted in there to service, well, probably more than just parcel 8, but that's kind of the location where they're at. That approval happened via administrative modification, and the criteria for that was used to permit, well, to allow the new reservoirs that are proposed in this plat in that vegetative buffer. There's conditions that we've added that would require that to be revegetated, kind of to be in line with what currently exists with the reservoirs in parcel 8. In the 10 years that we've had those reservoirs, they seem to be doing pretty well. We haven't had a lot of, or any complaints that I'm aware of.
Mike, that's, isn't that some sort of trust land to the west, for national, not national, but state?
That's the East Cougar Wildlands
So,
Regional
I mean,
Park.
nothing can ever be developed there anyway, right?
So no habitable structure could ever be permitted in the western buffer, and then no, as far as I know, nothing will ever be built in the regional wildland park to the west.
Okay, so I mean, it is in the buffer there. However, there's forest that's going to be there for a long time on the other side.
Yes.
I mean, I know that seems okay. I want to go back here on page 24 of 27 for the trails. There's a part of you guys' response there. It talks about access to the trails during construction.
Are we in a staff report or the
Yeah,
memo?
well, the page 14, thanks.
Okay, that's where I was confused.
It says 24 space out. I just wanted to highlight that it says the applicant intends to facilitate access to the existing trails during non-working hours. And I wonder if you had a definition of non-working hours and,
So I think, and Lucy, correct me if I'm wrong, construction hours are 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Monday through Friday. And then work can occur on a Saturday, but that requires a separate approval.
okay. So it's a little gray here. Will access be provided for the existing trails during those times? Will there be an alternate route to get to those trailheads?
So I think the expectation would be that during leading up to construction, we would ask and work with them to provide a plan to try to do what we can to make sure the trails are active and open. And I think that's what this is getting at. And I think that they've indicated that they'd be willing to do that.
But they do have the provision to shut down the trailhead if they feel it's not safe during construction.
Yeah, I
hours?
mean, if there's going to be times during construction that if it's a safety risk that they might have to close it. And I think, we've talked about having good notification or making the public aware, doing some other outreach things just to get everyone on the same page.
Okay. I just wanted to highlight that. It seemed kind of important.
Thank you. Parking.
Why are you looking at me?
Unfortunately, the purview of parking in a preliminary plat isn't what it is in an STP. So we haven't dug in terribly deep on it, but there were some questions that we want to address. The first being, how will ADA and delivery parking be handled? Because these are all this is a single family development, there likely won't be an ADA parking requirement. That'll be verified with the building permit, and that's something that our building wing of Development Services Department looks at. So it's unlikely that that's even going to be an issue. And then delivery parking's kind of the same thing. There's no commercial or retail proposed here. So I think the expectation would be that delivery vehicles would pull into a driveway or park on street or do other things to make their deliveries. And then we had a question from David Kapler about how parking will be handled, controlled to deter trailhead parking. It was a great comment. I dug through the development agreement and looked at the trails, the standard for the 2 trails that are proposed in this project, and they actually don't allow for trailhead parking. So the fact that none is proposed is consistent with what the development agreement allows. Those are my 2 comments about parking, but if there's other questions, fire away.
No, I just want to make a comment. Carl had mentioned here. It's probably a good idea just to remind the public that you know, I know you talked about it at the beginning, but it's a preliminary plat as opposed to site development permit. You just referred to that, and just so you know, the site development permits we look at circulation, parks, parking, landscape, plazas, that sort of thing. But for these preliminary plats, it's really circulation and land use primarily. So we don't really have the opportunity to get into very specific areas about parking and home types and that sort of thing. Okay? Thanks.
There will be a little bit more discussion about home design coming up.
Good.
So number 10, response about the potential annexation area to the north and a request that the city has received that's currently being heard by the city council to annex these properties to the north that are currently in King County. How they are in the city's identified potential annexation area, but currently they're in King County jurisdiction. But it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's 8 parcels in the red there. And then the King County map that I have doesn't show the lot lines as we've seen them with this, but I've kind of identified where 7, 8, and 9 are. So those are the parcels in question. That's a totally separate action that occurs through the city council, and they would have to approve it. But I want to outline kind of that process just for everyone's information. The city did receive a request from the master developer to annex those parcels into the city on March 5th, and that is currently being heard by the city council. It's up to the city council whether or not they wish to elect to bring those parcels into the city. If they did make that election, the next step would be that would go in front of the King County Boundary Review Board, who would have to approve it. I'm not super familiar with that process, but let's just assume that the King County Boundary Review Board approved the annexation. Then those parcels would become part of the city. There'd be another third process that would be required to get those parcels actually into the Talus urban village, and that would require a major amendment to the development agreement, which is another council process. All major amendments are heard by the city council, and at that time the council would make the decision on whether or not they want these parcels to be part of the Talus urban village. It's kind of outside of the purview of this plat, but it is being heard by the city council, and if anyone has questions or comments about that, I would encourage you to send a letter to the council or reach out to them. So I think Carolyn probably hit the brunt of these regarding slope stability and site conditions. I know everyone has fresh on their minds the tragedy in Oso, and we've had a lot of questions about this being a mountain community and the potential for for landslides and the potential of the walls. I think Carolyn's done a good job of tackling these. If she'd like to add something, certainly that'd be fine. If not, if we have other questions, concerns. Okay.
We got it covered. Thank you.
Oops, wrong way. 2 more. Phasing of the project. So Ryan, let me know if I'm missing anything here, but we had a question about how long this thing's going to take and what the process would be. So in the event that the preliminary plat gets approved by the city council, well, first let me take a step back. Site construction, let me take another step back. All of this timing is assuming that things get approved. So this timing assumes that Commission recommends approval to the council, and without too much delay, council approves the preliminary plat. Assuming those things happen, they've indicated that site construction would start in 2014 or early 2015. A final plat would come forward at the end of this year, and that'll probably go over the turn of the year. Home construction early to mid 2015, and then assuming favorable market conditions, they've indicated that they could have this thing wrapped up as early as 2017. We know how the markets can be, and certainly I don't think any of that's set in stone, but is that pretty accurate with what you guys? And finally, number 13, these are just a few kind of concerns, comments, questions that I had a hard time wrapping into any of the other ones. We had a question about forest fires. I went back and looked in our code and the development agreement. We don't have anything that speaks to that. I know that the building codes are constantly being updated, and my assumption is that the construction materials take that into account, but we don't have any purview to regulate that through this process. Housing design, we had a member of the community talk about the homes integrating in with the existing community, meeting the mountain character of Talus, and I think those things are important, and we have the Talus ARC to review the projects. So in terms of house design, that's the Talus ARC will tackle that. And lastly, what is the validity of a preliminary plat? And that is 3 years. So that concludes my presentation. Next, we're going to open it up for public comment. Oh, sorry. Let's take any more final questions. Eric.
Just real quick, I think I'll speak for everyone here. You've done a super job, Mike. Thank you so much for entertaining all the questions and putting this whole package together. Super job, and I think we all really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you, Mike.
Okay.
We're going to go to public comment before we get into our further questions, because some of those may come up. If you haven't signed up, we ask that you do so right here on the clipboard. And when I call your name, I'd like you to go to the microphone, state your name, your address, and we want to hear what you have to say, but please try and keep your comments brief, because we do have a lot of people here tonight, but we want to make sure you are heard. So at this time, is there anybody that hasn't signed up that would like to before the clipboard is brought to my attention? No. Okay. And if I butcher your name, it's Carl's fault. Okay, let's start with Karen Porterfield.
Hi, Karen Porterfield. Address is 2498 Northwest Stony Creek Drive, Issaquah. And since I'm your first speaker, think of me as the warm-up band for you guys. So, yes, we're going to go back to the wall. And a couple things, as we have this conversation, I'd like everybody to keep in mind the wall that we've referenced behind Home Depot, that's 30 feet. So we're talking about a wall that is half again as high or more. And I'd also like to reference that out of all the pictures that we saw tonight, all but one were taken from either highways or freeways, not placed in a residential area. So when we talk about mitigation of 48-foot walls, there is a significant question about how much can you mitigate. But the point that I really wanted to make is, the first one is, if the city feels so confident about the construction of this wall and the durability of this wall, why aren't you willing to take ownership for it? Why are you looking to pass on both the risk and the requirement for maintenance? The second point I'd like to make is, please keep in mind, as we've been talking about having the Talus Homeowners Association vote and accept for responsibility, i.e. most of us who live there, that the Homeowners Association rules and guidelines were written by, as is typical, the primary developers. So they were the ones who crafted this. And you may not be aware, but on several occasions, the board has voted with proxy votes from the commercial developers and basically ignored 100% vote by the people who live there. So when we are talking about the Talus vote and people accepting responsibility, please understand that the people who live there, we will show up, we will vote. We are having this conversation as we should with the homeowners association, but we really do not have the ability to impact the outcome. And so we have a developer who is more than happy to make the profit, but is not willing to accept responsibility for this wall, but allow the homeowners who don't have the ability to vote to assume that risk. So I'm just wanting to kind of give you guys some clarification when we hear people here talking so enthusiastically about how the homeowners will be happy to vote for this. Please understand that is not the case. Thank you very much for your time. I promised I'd keep it brief.
Thanks, Ms. Porterfield. Appreciate it. All right, Beth Lanning.
Hi, I'm Beth Lanning at 552 Lingering Pine Drive Northwest, and this is actually a question my husband had as he couldn't be here tonight. He would like to know if the developer, when clearing the plat, if it is approved, could chip the trees for repurpose onto the trails. And that was all he had. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lanning. Tony Latondre? Did I? Not bad. What is it? Laton, sorry.
Yeah, I'm Tony Latond. I live at 2408 Northwest Harmony Way, which is in the Bridges at Talus, close to where Karen lives. I don't have a lot more to say about, I think Karen really summarized our dilemma well. I would like to point out also that the commercial association that's part of our HOA has a deal where their dues can only go up by a small percentage every year, whereas the rest of the residents were hit with a 30% increase already this year. And the new walls going in, to me, represent a significant departure from the current walls that are there now. I mean, as far as from an engineering standpoint. So, you know, we could just get saddled with a huge amount of risk, and also it'd be interesting to find out, we'll have to talk to the consultants that we have, how much we would have to put in reserves to get ready for the 50-year replacement or whenever it's likely to be replaced. So we could be forced to have a significant burden of dues that the commercial association isn't going to have to shoulder. And yet they have most of the voting rights. Then the other, I have one simple question, and as far as the mature conifers that are between parcels 7 and 8, and my question is, I mean, technically they can all be cut down, and the question I have is how many need to be cut down for the road going through? You know, what is the plan for that? Or are we going to end up with something that looks like the Issaquah Highlands? Thank you.
I assume you don't like the Highlands. My home of 15 years, thank you. Which I love very much, by the way. Thank you, Mr. Laton. I was just messing with you. All right, Ken Esman? Easman, I'm sorry.
Ken Eastman, 2473 Northwest Stony Creek Drive, Issaquah. First off, I want to thank the staff for putting in condition number 8, where we have some discussion and we have some consideration into who's going to own these retaining walls and other infrastructure. Let's not forget the fact that there are private streets up there, and streets don't last forever. I wouldn't be concerned if all that infrastructure was owned by the city of Issaquah, but to Karen and Tony's point, it looks like the homeowners are going to be saddled with maintenance and liability for private roads, retaining walls. And I just want to piggyback on what Tony said. If you look at the current Talus community and you look at the infrastructure that the HOA is responsible for, which means every homeowner, when reflecting on the scope of what it's going to take in parcel 7 and parcel 8 to actually have 50 home sites, it strikes me that there's a significant amount of infrastructure in there that is not commensurate with the rest of Talus in terms of these very long and these very high retaining walls, private streets. For a mere 50 homes, the rest of the homeowners are going to be saddled for years to come with all of this expensive infrastructure. And, you know, my one vote out of many homeowners would be to the Talus Homeowners Association. Let's understand what we're getting into before we sign up for this. This is way significantly more than the other parts of Talus. Sure, there's a 30-foot wall there, but this is a collection of extremely long and tall walls and private streets for a mere 50 homeowner sites. My second comment is noise and the construction that's going to be going on. I live in the Bridges community, and I would like to encourage the city and the staff to work with the developers to put some sort of barrier between the construction that's going to happen down at parcel 9, all of the dust and the noise. Recently, our green belt was severely cut, and that's just going to increase the impact of the homeowners in that part of the Bridges community. So we are currently subject to compression braking coming down our long hill. Based on the topography of where the Shangri-La Way extension is going to be, that looks to also be a very steep hill with a lot of construction vehicles coming up and down there. If compression braking is not legal in the city of Issaquah, then I'd like to understand how that's going to be enforced and how those trucks are going to come down that hill with their standard braking. But it's very disruptive now because of the construction that's going on in the bridges, and we're certainly not looking forward to having that continue for the next 3 years coming down Shangri-La Way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eastman. Ken Konismark.
Hello, Ken Koenigsmark, 5713 285th Avenue Southeast in Issaquah. For those who may not know, I go way back to the very beginnings of the Talus development, when the city sent Intercorp, Mike Miller, Doug Barnes, the earliest people, to myself and Joanna Bueller, saying, talk to Ken and Joanna before you even start this to be sure you won't get into a big fight when this goes forward with the city. We worked with the developer over 2 years to come up with the urban village concept. We then both served on the reader team for Talus and dug into all the details of the development agreement. So the point being, I'm intimately familiar from beginning to end with this development. And I have two major problems with the current proposal that I'd like to discuss with you tonight. The first is what was briefly addressed, the violation of the 50-foot buffer adjoining Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park. It's outlined in paragraph 5.3.2 of the development agreement. I'd like to give you a copy. I insisted on that provision being in the development agreement for good reason, to protect the integrity of our public lands in the park, whether that be Cougar, Squak Mountain State Park, State Department of Natural Resources, all around us. The history is of private owners building up to the edge of a park, then demanding that the park cut down the trees so they don't fall on their home. Meanwhile, the park is used as a dumping ground for yard waste, dog poop, tree houses, and everything else. This was the leading case where we got a 50-foot buffer to protect the integrity of the park. why would we now violate the very clear language which says you cannot use that buffer for roads, water towers, infrastructure, and retaining walls? It's not allowed. For the public here, I'd like to read it. It's very quickly and short. A vegetative buffer not less than 50 feet wide shall be preserved. It's not should, shall. In other words, must be preserved on the westerly boundary of the Talus property, north of Westfort's Tibbetts Creek, except that trails and water utility crossings approved by the designated official may be constructed and maintained within the buffer. Nothing about water tanks, nothing about retaining walls, nothing about roads. This is to the benefit of the developer at the expense of land that we, the public, own. Cannot be allowed. And in fact, this is not something that should be changed through an administrative minor change. This is something that's fundamental that even the mayor's designated official does not have power to change, because that official is restricted to trail and water utility crossings only. So I submit to you as a development commission, you cannot approve this in its current form with the road, the water tanks, and the retaining walls built into this buffer, or it's in direct violation of the language of the development agreement. Secondly, the proposed extension of Road A and Parcel 7 to stub at the end to serve the potential future annexation is in direct violation of the intent and spirit and verbal agreements that were in existence from the beginnings of this concept. It was very clear with Intracorp, with the Reader team, with the city officials at the time, throughout the entire process, there was never to be scab-on annexation and future development feeding off of infrastructure in Talus. In fact, if you look at the development agreement, there are 4 parcels identified as potential expansion areas. They are all down along SR 900, which made sense. It was conscious and intentional that there was no road or connections to be provided west or north of the existing Talus development. So again, any language or any on-the-ground construction that would facilitate or encourage such annexation and future use needs to be stopped now, because that was never the intent. It's meant to be a self-contained mountain village. It's done very well. Let's not screw it up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Konismark. Lisa Mikowski. Welcome back.
Lisa Milkowski, 890 Lingering Pine Lane, Issaquah, in Talus. My first question is a hypothetical one. What development plan would not be supported? What would it look like? I think we know what that answer is. Related to that, what is the legal line? Are we broaching on that or across that with this proposal? My second comment, I guess, would be related to end question, are the slopes stable? And we heard from an engineer about what the current status is, and the statement that essentially that is stable at a 1.5, whatever number. Being an engineer, I appreciate numbers too. But what I know as a resident of Talus is that there have been mudslides in Talus. Okay, so go to YouTube and go to, type in Issaquah Talus mudslide and look at a couple videos. Okay, it looks nicer than the water feature in the front of Talus. Okay. That mudslide was about 3 years ago, and there are a couple of homes in Mountain Air that were affected. That is right adjacent to this area we're talking about. Okay? So check that out. I would not want to be those residents. So is the current area stable? From what I see in those mudslide videos and what I know about flooding in the back of homes of Aliante, my answer is it's currently in question. So there is risk if we further do work, okay? So I want to point that out. As HOA member, I do not want to be responsible for another wall of such magnitude. Okay, in terms of, I have an elementary and a middle school child, and I frequently have to call the Issaquah School District busing about issues of busing within Talus. They are usually very short with me because they are very frustrated with dealing with busing in Talus. And what I see of the development is dead ends. And from my conversations with them on a road that is a loop, and they don't want to go down the loop now, they certainly are not going to want to deal with the busing issues associated with all those dead ends and no loop. I live right adjacent to Harvey Manning Park, and my kids have some stomp rockets. And one of the questions that was so nicely presented was, can you throw a ball and not have it go over the wall? That's good, but what my kids want to do is go out and play with their stomp rockets, and they want to build rockets with Skittles, and I think that's great. They're learning their science, but guess where all of that's going to go, and mom and dad are going to have to chase it down. These parks are not big enough for actual use. The only one that's really big enough is Harvey Manning Park. The others, they really are not usable for things kids want to do. So what I'm asking is that there be some level of self-control. Show that you have level of self-control to not just continue the development. Sometimes we have to slow down and look at this and resolve risks. And I wrote down about 10 questions of what I see where we need appropriate analysis. And we really need to examine the level of risk. And I don't want to go through all of that because that would take longer than I'm already taking. What would be the impact to existing property values? And I see it as great because I see there's so many questions of risk yet to be resolved. I love Issaquah. Please execute self-control and keep it a great place to live.
Thank you, Ms. Milkowski. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? That's the last name I have on the list right now. Mr. Kapler.
Thank you. David Kapler, 255 Southeast Andrews Street. As you know, I'm not a big fan of the wall and that. There's a couple of, and I'm not saying we're not going to end up with it, but anyway, because we're going to end up with a wall, I'm afraid, we need to really put some extra care into it, and want to address some of that. In the Urban Village Design Guidelines, it says, generally Mountain Village character prescribes site planning and design that adapts and reflects the physical characteristics of the land. You know, I don't think we're following that. Another one, in some of the more mountainous development parcels, homes are nestled into the hillside and step up as the topography moves upward. I don't feel we're following that one either. And there's, you know, economic arguments saying it's not feasible in that. But the walls, if the wall's going to be there, it's going to take quite a construction job to build. They're talking about 8 to 10 feet to get to bedrock, so you're digging down a long ways. Then you're building a wall that averages over 38 feet high for 800 feet. At the bottom, there's supposed to be landscaping, and there's supposed to be a road for future access to the trail because there's no to the wall because there's no access to the wall from the top once the houses are in. You couldn't even, I mean, you get I don't know what you could get in, but you're not going to get anything that can deal with a 40-some foot wall, that's for sure. So you're looking at working at the bottom. During the construction, going down 8 to 10 feet just to get to the bedrock, we're likely going to see some materials going down into the open space, parcel A, I think it is. If in the future they have to do anything with the wall, the landscaping across the bottom of the wall, the trail would all be taken out. The road, they'd have to use the road at the bottom. There's no even provision for a turnaround, so potentially if they had to get a dump truck in there or other machinery, they would be backing down 800 feet. So there's a lot of potential future impact to the open space below the wall and a lot of cost of reestablishing the trail, reestablishing the landscape at the bottom of the trail. One thing I'd like to see is most of the trees on that parcel below the wall are older maples and alders, and they're not reseeding because both of those trees need more sun than they get now. There's very few evergreens down there below. If we could see some effort to do just with bare root cedar trees below that area, so eventually when they do have to go in and take out the landscaping to access the bottom of that wall, maybe it's over 50 years, whatever, it's going to happen eventually, that there's some evergreen trees downslope. You're not going to get reestablishment of younger alders or maples on that whole slope all the way down. You've got to get some evergreens in there. And the best one I would think would be cedar. For one thing, firs aren't going to survive in the summer shade that's there from the canopy of those older trees. At the end of the trail, at the end of the wall, the north end, you got to go up 33 feet in elevation, and the lots are 95 feet deep. So we're going to talk about stairs. That'll be one of the places we've got to make sure the stairs are well designed, because that's climbing 33 feet and 95 feet is pretty steep. One of the things that's always bugged me about the two towers that are there is that bright green paint. If we could just get a darker color of paint, it would sure be a lot. It'd be nice to have some of the artwork on it, you know, the trees and stuff that have been used in other places, but at least let's look at the paint colors. Invasives, we got some good wording coming on the invasive issue, and I think that's, I'm much more comfortable with that. Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park is one of the largest parks, if not the largest park of its kind, that close to an urban area. It's still relatively undiscovered. Perhaps Tract I could be identified as some parking for that. It's not wooded right now. I think it's just a gravel lot in front of the water tower. If you were to use it for parking, daytime parking or whatever, I'd certainly not allow any overnight parking. Otherwise, you're going to have RVs and boat trailers and the rest. You know, it would have to be identified as daytime parking only, or into the evening if people, you know, all those condos right next to that site are going to have a parking problem. So this could be overflow parking there, but you don't really want it as overnight parking for the condos or for anybody else. But I think that would be a more realistic use for that land. It's not a bunch of, we're not talking trees down to do that. Ken's points about the 50-foot strip are valid, and I'm glad to see he remembers some of this stuff better than I do, and he's done his research today, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kapler. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Oh, hello. I didn't even see you back there. Hi, Connie. What's that? Thank you. I thought you were going to do an interpretive dance tonight.
No, you don't want to see that.
She's always surprising us. No, I did it earlier.
So we're funny. All right. So my name's Connie Marsh, and I have a store at 1175 Northwest Gilman Boulevard, and also live in Issaquah. And it feels like I've had this conversation many times, almost exactly the same. But first I wanted to thank Mike, because he has been fielding pesky calls and emails, and I'm surprised he can smile at all anymore. But so good job. We really don't hate you. It's just we might hate this. And these guys were kind enough to give us some bits and pieces and sit and chat with us, which we appreciate a lot. So, given that, I'm going to rip it all up. One of the statements that Mike made was that the style of the housing actually would go to the ARC. But in the development agreement, in a place called Mountain Village Site Planning, which is exactly where we are. It talks about the Mountain Village character and all the things that Dave talked about, which is taking up varying grade with homes, building to the topography, how to put the parking below so that you can make your buildings go up the hill, and all of these things, which is exactly what we're discussing right now, because what we are doing is we are using a very large retaining wall and a series of them to create relatively flat parcels so that we can build standardized normal homes. When this was supposed to be a mountain village with interesting homes, not the same old home. And I guess I want better for my town. And I'm getting tired of having the lowest common denominator all the time, because we can do better than just what the market will bear. We create these visions, and then we say, but the market won't do it. So these poor guys are going to end up having to pay for it all. And I don't think that's right. I don't think it's fair, when we could actually figure out how to take up the grade in the housing. So, what I did is I started repeating to myself, oh my gosh, that sounds like Talus 10, 11, and 12. Remember when we all stood up here and yelled, you guys are going into our native growth protection area. We're going to grade, 12 feet into an area that was totally protected, because they said, well, we can. And so we chafed, we brought people, and you guys eventually threw it to the council and said, well, you guys are better at handling this than we are. So what we're doing is we're looking at that same 50-foot buffer issue right now, again, with the water towers, because in reading the development agreement, going into the 50-foot forest buffer was not an administrative minor modification. That's a major mod. When you read the language, you can't do it with an administrative minor modification, because this is a requirement within the very beginning of the development agreement, and that does not feed any of the things that are allowed in an administrative minor modification. And so if we do it again, you're just exacerbating a problem that's not really yours, frankly. It's between staff and city council, because city council needs to approve that. So I would push that one onto them and say, this is a decision for you all. Now, let's see what other excitement I have here. Oh, also in the development agreement, it talks about, in some instances, the transition will be a blended edge. In others, the edge will be more apparent. In no case should the edge of a development parcel be abrupt. Well, I don't think that road going down parcel A could be any more abrupt. I mean, so I think you need to add a condition to that, saying that that will be changed to not be abrupt, and then if they decide that an annexation would go through, they would have to change how that went, because as far as I can see, that's against the development agreement at this point in time. And so I keep watching development agreements. We had Lakeside, right? You got some terrain in Lakeside going on, right? Remember all those beautiful pictures showing all those houses taking up all that terrain? But you can't do it here for some reason. What are we going to do when Lakeside comes up? And they say the same thing, the market won't bear it. Let's see, where are we? Oh, Issaquah Highlands. Now you go into Issaquah Highlands and what do you see? The first thing you see is a gas station. And then you see a suburban Safeway. And it's supposed to be an urban village, right? So then we're going to have Costco coming up soon with the development agreement, and I don't know what that one's going to say. We have Rowley and this whole vision of what it's going to be. And then on top of that, you have the Central Issaquah plan, where everyone is telling, I see I'm getting all riled up, where everyone is telling me that, the vision is what's going to rule in that. We don't have to have standards. We're going to look at our vision, and that's how we're going to implement it. And I fail to see how it is working. 15 years later, we are still making the same darn mistakes, and we are not building to the visions that we're creating. Instead, we're building again to the lowest common denominator. And so I know realistically, that when we get this far, the chances of big change for you all is probably small. But I'm ever hopeful that you're going to do something dramatic and change it and say, I don't think this is in keeping. I think we need to figure out some other conditions that will make this plat great. I want Talus great. I don't want the same old suburban housing on top of a hill. I want something that I can look at and say, I love that. This is awesome. And I'm just so tired of having it always be, just not that hot. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Marsh. Is there anyone else that would like to speak this evening? Last call. Okay, seeing no further public comment. We will go ahead and close that part of the meeting right now, and we'd like to take a short recess so that staff can respond, and we can move on to the next phase of this conversation. Okay? Do you guys... That was the intent, but that's not necessarily absolute. So, all right. So we're going to take, how long do you need, Lucy?
About 10 minutes should be good.
About 10 minutes. We'll all be gone at 9, so not really. We'll be back in at 9 o'clock. We'll resume. Thank you.
So we're going to go first, then you go second.
All right, everybody. We are back. Thank you for your patience. And I'm going to turn the floor over to Lucy, who will give us a few responses. No, she will not? Yes, she will.
I will give you a few responses.
She will.
Well, let's see. I'm going to pick the starry one. There we go. So I'm going to run through some responses to the public comment. Then the applicant will have a chance to respond, and then it'll be your turn to discuss. So, I'm going to go through them generally in order. In terms of, I think we've already spoken about the Home Depot wall. There was a question about why the city wouldn't own them. The city just owns walls that are usually associated with right-of-way or that are on public property, and these are private property walls that are associated with private development. In terms of the HOA and concerns that the applicant or the residents have relative to how it's run and their ability to have a voice, we don't really have a role in how that is run. I mean, I hear their concerns. Their representation is really through the HOA and through voting at the HOA and the rules that are established through the HOA. And I'm not familiar with the HOA voting structure. So I think that one is separate from our purview. There were questions about, the ownership of the walls, the cost of owning the walls, the division of public and private roads and expenses. So I've kind of talked about the HOA piece. Talus is a combination of public and private roads that are, I think most plats contain both. This particular proposal was made by the applicant in terms of how that's divided. The one thing I would add is that the HOA has the ability to decide the costs of the various things can be apportioned unequally. So there could be a surcharge, for instance, and they do that when you have a park. An area with a larger park may pay more to the HOA for the maintenance of that park than an area with a small park. So likewise, where you have more private roads or walls with greater maintenance responsibilities, those are not necessarily borne by all the homeowners equally. Noise, dust, compression breaks. I don't know specifically what the rules are in the city regarding compression breaks, but those are things that we would address through the construction permits and the rules that are in place for the city. They're not really land use rules, but we're now aware of those issues. We were already aware of the noise and dust issues that homeowners have brought up, and the breaks will be on our radar as well. The 50-foot buffer. So in, I believe, 2004, with the previous tanks, which are in this area, an administrative minor modification was approved allowing those in the 50-foot buffer. That was approved by the city under the authority that they believed that they possessed, and has been the basis for the construction that occurred. And we are not in a position to question that going forward, because it was the basis for previous approvals, and we wouldn't really have a way of revisiting that because we've created a precedent for with that previous decision.
I have a clarification question, please. Are the tanks the only things that are impinging on this buffer in this entire design?
And the access to them. So you can you see all right? So the road, so right now the existing road is this one that comes to a pair of tanks. There's this road and a pair of tanks. This slide doesn't show very well. So there's some terraced walls here and a rockery, yes, a rockery here. The applicant has indicated that it is likely that they could eliminate those walls. I think from the city's perspective, the reason that the terraced walls were not a concern was that the requirement was that landscaping such as trees be provided between those walls to revegetate that area. Okay.
Sorry, Lucy. So if you mentioned that the applicant has mentioned that maybe we can do away with those walls. If those walls aren't there, then there is nothing else that's infringing on that 50-foot buffer?
They are not proposing to remove the tanks or the access road.
Right. Everything would be as is.
So there's, and I may not be very clear, Jim, I'm sorry. So there are already these existing tanks. And the only other thing that's proposed to be in the 50-foot buffer is another pair of tanks.
The new reservoir.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to, sometimes it's confusing and you think there's only one pair, but there would be two. Okay. Back to the stars. So another point that was brought up was that Road A was being taken up to the future parcels that have been proposed for annexation, and that was never an expectation of the development agreement. And I think the point that we want to clear up is that this process does not decide if that area will be annexed or if this road would be extended to serve that area. That is a council decision, not part of this plat, but completely separately through the annexation and modification of the development agreement. While it may be true that at the beginning of the development agreement, all the annexation parcels were down towards SR 900, As a major modification, the council may consider making broader changes. This has happened numerous times at Issaquah Highlands. The Park and Ride, the Reed property, which is now called West Highlands Park. There are a number of areas that the council chose to annex into the development agreement through a public process at which people had the opportunity to comment on their support and or concerns. We are suggesting that and Mike is busily crafting, I think it's going to be a construction condition that would have that road end as a drive, in the driveway of the house, and that an extension to the actual northern property line would be associated with, subsequent to that determination by the council of whether that area should be annexed or not. Does that make sense? There were some questions about whether legal lines had been crossed or whether there were any sort of limits to what would be approved. I think the point to make there is that the development agreement establishes certain parameters in which this plat has to be reviewed, things like heights, minimum density, maximum density. And this plat falls at the lower end of that density range. So there are limits, and we are within those limits. In terms of the school bus, the district was part of the road standard review when the development agreement was adopted. I don't think that the expectation by the school district is that they serve every road. I think that there are points where children and or families walk to various collection points, and the district is not intending to come into every single road. And they have, families have the opportunity to go speak to the school district if they feel that their area should be served, and if they don't feel the buses are coming far enough into the community. That's really the venue for that conversation. In terms of the parks not being big enough, I think one of the things that are pretty consistent in the urban villages are a variety of different kinds of parks. The reason Harvey Manning Park was built was a desire to create a larger, flatter, more significant flat area to serve that neighborhood. Other parks meet a variety of needs, and so it's probably true that we wouldn't be able to design parks with fences to address stomp rockets, although that might be the learning experience for the families if it goes over the wall. But seriously, the idea is that there are a variety of parks that provide a variety of different choices, and not all parks are meant to serve all the needs that the community may have. There was quite a bit of discussion about site planning and reflecting the characteristics of the land, and whether the homes nestled into the hillsides, and whether these walls were necessary. And I think the sort of starting point has been that without some degree of walls, no road could make it in there that meets the grade restrictions that the city has for roads. I think the second piece is that there are minimum and maximum density ranges for each parcel. Part of that is because we are clustering development into the areas that were identified to be appropriate for development, and I think about 450 acres were set aside to be permanently preserved. to get within that density range that's been identified takes a certain amount of walls. The applicant has requested and been approved or elected to move down to the lowest density category, and that's fine. But there is still a certain amount of minimum density that's expected. And because the slopes are steeper, you couldn't terrace the walls and not just be building a series of the same tall wall going down the slope. So while I think it is the applicant's choice to have relatively flat parcels, there's still a fair amount of topography that, you know, for instance, this is one tier, this is another tier, this is another tier. It's not flat across the whole parcel. It's the terraces are not necessarily in the walls, but there are small walls that are taking up grade. And some parts of these roads, such as in here, are fairly steep. There were some questions about the road at the bottom of the wall and how that would work, and how, if the wall had to be replaced, how would that access? The first thing I want to say is that's not a traditional road. It is an access route, but it's not that it would be paved in asphalt, for instance. Second, we already have a condition in place that requires that the wall replacement be considered in the construction permit for the wall. And so the access at the bottom of the wall would be part of that review, because it would obviously be integral to replacing the wall. There were some questions about adding additional cedars and/or impacts to the area, the existing vegetated areas, treed areas. I mean, there would be construction fencing required along the edges to protect those areas. In terms of adding additional sort of understory trees to further infill the areas to minimize the visual impact, that's another condition. I think it may be a construction condition that Mike is working on drafting. Talked about that. And, you know, a lot of Connie's concern, I guess she's gone. A lot of Connie's concern about the vision is around the architecture and the choice of building types and the character of the buildings. That's something that the city determined to give to the ARC. There is an architectural review committee at Talus run by an architect, and the master developer is the selector of who a parcel is sold to. So that is unfortunately, relative to Connie's comment, out of our purview.
Thank you. And this time I think the applicant's going to come up and speak. Is that correct?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy, and Commission, thank you. Recognizing the late hour, there's not a lot that we want to add. We do agree with the comments that Lucy has offered, and understanding some of the additional conditions that Mike is preparing. I think one is related to some additional vegetation at the bottom of the wall as it's constructed, and that's something that we can support. One other comment that somebody asked about was whether any additional clearing of trees or vegetation up on the hillside, if they could be chipped on site and left for the association to use for hog fueling trails, and that's something that the applicant is willing to do as well. I don't know if that necessarily needs to be a condition, but it's something that we can voluntarily work with the association on. I think there's a couple more comments that Al Furry would like to offer on the 50-foot buffer, and I don't know if Darren, if you want to speak to some of the other HOA comments, he'll do that as well.
Al Furry with Triad Associates. Thank you, Commission and staff. I wanted to get into the record my own recollection of 17 years ago when we were discussing the 50-foot buffer. I was in those meetings with Dave McDuff, and I want to say I have the greatest respect for Mr. Koenigsmark. He was a great collaborator in the original development agreement. And on the topic of the 50-foot buffer, the things I remember distinctly was that it wasn't to be occupied by habitable spaces, that part of the concern was dumping the garbage across the line, intrusion from homes into it, people being concerned about trees in the park being hazard and going in and cutting them down. So it was a way to provide additional protection of the park without essentially moving the park over. So one thing I'll point out is that the revegetation was presumed for any kind of activity that would occur there. And so it didn't state that it was a native growth protection area. It said it was a vegetated buffer. So, and that's consistent with my recollection. And so the problem 17 years later is, you look at it and you read it. It does mention water facilities. I remember clearly that we always knew that we would have to have a reservoir at the very pinnacle top of the hill. And that's what we're showing here. And in my view, it's consistent with those original discussions. And I think in a reading of the requirement of the development agreement, I think it's also consistent with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have something to say too? Thanks.
I wanted to comment briefly about some of the HOA concerns. Specifically, I think one of the concerns mentioned was a perception that somehow we, the master developer, still control the homeowners association, and that the residents don't have a vote. I personally believe that to be inaccurate. We currently, as Talus Management Services, have turned over the board to the homeowners association. We only control 100 votes out of the 1,200 plus residences that are currently within Talus, and those are 100 single-family residences that are proportioned to only parcels 7, 8, and 9. Our voting rights are limited specifically to board member votes on an annual basis and ratification of the homeowner association budget. We don't vote on any other items, nor does anybody else. The board has voting control of that. I do know there are some concerns with regard to the commercial association, which is separate from both the Talus Management Services as master developer, and they control some of the multifamily properties and the commercial property. So that would be the office development, potential office development at the base of the hill. Timber Ridge is part of that. I believe the 2 apartment complexes that are within there are all fall under that commercial association. And so they have voting rights relative to the units associated with those developments. And so, again, I just want to make it clear that we, as the master developer, do not control those votes, and I think it's inaccurate to say that we're the puppet master for the HOA board in a sense. So I just want to make that point.
Darren, can I ask for clarification real quick?
You bet.
So the commercial and the multifamily, how many votes do they have relative to the other residents?
I can't answer the question, and we may be able to get an answer because I have some of the property management group here.
Okay.
And they're intimately familiar with that. I want to say there's approximately 1,200 residences that have been built and that may include these, so it could be 1,100 plus whatever we're going to build here. Again, we have 100 of those 1,200. Commercial votes, do we know?
Not counting parcel 16-1, which has just been reduced from 66 votes to 28. Right now, the residential holds 964 votes, or 974 votes, and the commercial association holds 964 votes. And the four commercial entities are the parcel that's not developed at the bottom of Talus Drive, Timber Ridge, the estates at Cougar Mountain, and Rosecrest.
Thank you.
So additionally, I'd point out that as undeveloped parcels that I own, since 2007, we have paid our dues and received no benefit for any maintenance relative to the HOA for the 100 properties, the 100 parcels that we're paying on. And we paid probably in excess of $350,000 over the last 7 years into the association for parcels that have never been developed. So I feel like we've at least helped the residential association through this process. Further, I think having been part of the budget review when we did participate that, and we did have management help assistance with that, you know, a majority of the budget that we're talking about for Talus is really related to landscaping. You have taxes, some taxes, you have some maintenance, snow maintenance, there's trail maintenance, and landscaping are the primary budget items. There certainly are replacements associated with some of the walls, some of the other amenities that are within Talus, but those are minor budget items, and the wall maintenance items and wall reporting relative to the overall budget are fairly minor. We certainly look forward to having discussions with the, and have been having, not specifically on this topic, but do have a relationship with the property management company and some of the current board members, and we're happy to discuss these items. I just don't think they're as large and of a concern as maybe has been voiced here. I think it can be perceived as being that big of a concern. At the end of the day, I think there's more of a balance there. So that's really all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Then at this time, I'd like to go into commission discussion. Let's, obviously say what you have to say, but let's try and be brief and concise as much as possible, and I'll try and listen to my own advice. Yeah, of course. That was a question, so yes.
Well, and Darren, maybe you can answer. One thing that we've never really heard is what's going to be the cost of constructing these walls. I understand what you're saying and appreciate what you're saying about the ongoing maintenance not really being that significant in the grand scheme. But I'm thinking 50 years down the road, if we need to swap out the wall for a new one, I mean, what do these walls cost?
Well, you're looking at all the walls in total. So you've got the main one is this particular wall, and I don't have a precise cost on that particular wall. You have multiple walls that are significantly smaller throughout the parcel.
Mike, excuse me, Darren, just a moment. Mike, can you go back to that wall diagram? That'll be a lot easier because I think a lot of discussion is going to happen there.
And I'll try and use the pointer too. So, yeah, if you're looking, where's the pointer? So if we start in parcel 9, these are, significantly shorter walls that just help divide the parcel 9 area here and a little bit here. You've got the soldier pile walls, the soil nail walls, which are the granite faux style that we're proposing that we'll be using along the access road and a little bit up in here. Those again are significantly shorter. This wall here is the primary concern wall and the access, and we're using the same type of system with some of the soil nail walls and rockeries that are significantly shorter. Overall, for all 3 parcels, we're looking at about $2.5 million total for all the walls. I can't give you a specific number of what this particular, the big wall is of that. And that includes installation of the wall, the grid, everything associated with that. Replacement typically of particularly this wall, this is what we call a faced wall on an MSE. And so the grid in that really stays in place, and you're able to come in and basically reface that without going back into the earth portion of that. You know, certainly you're going to have access issues you're going to have to deal with, but it's not maybe a total replacement cost is not what you're looking at.
So I'm assuming
some percentage, you know.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that $2.5 million does not include engineering, though.
No, that's just direct construction costs.
Are you, Jim? Did you get your question answered? Okay, Eric.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Lucy. You explained that this whole. I appreciate your explanation, and I think for the public that's a good understanding and clarification. But for the commission, that doesn't fall under our purview as far as the whole HOA issue and responsibilities and so forth. Is that correct?
Eric, I think what you're hitting on is the question of, for instance, whether the cost of the walls can be a consideration. I think that's a pretty challenge. I mean, I think we would be challenged to find
Your microphone.
Thank you. I'm partly looking in the development agreement, and I don't really see something where cost is part of the consideration. We do have things that talk about efficient infrastructure and the challenge that we face is that we're not insensitive to the concerns that are being raised, but most of this is really related to the HOA and whether walls are consistent with the expectation of the development agreement.
Thank you, Lucy.
Okay. I know there's other concerns. Michael? Oh, nothing at this time? Okay. Tim, did you have anything? Farrell?
No questions.
Really? Scott?
Sorry, one last quick one. You mentioned preserved areas, about 450 acres, I thought you said. Where are those preserved areas at, or are they already preserved?
So if, yes, they are already preserved. So if you looked at the map right above Jim's head, you see the sort of pale orange area that represents the developed area of Talus. Like, yes, there. And then below that is that pale green. No, not the dark green, the pale green. All of that was set aside and preserved as part of the Talus development.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I have a question regarding something you said about the administrative minor modification.
Sure.
And the tanks in the buffer.
Yes.
So, I don't know. I look at this that was provided to us by Mr. Koenigsmark, I believe.
Do we have?
The
Do you have
westerly
a copy that we could look at as well? Oh, I see. That's the
yeah.
part of the development agreement.
Yeah.
Yes.
5.3.2, the westerly buffer. So the administrative minor modification came without any discussion from, obviously this commission, and it went to the city council, and they made a decision, correct?
The process of doing the modification?
Administrative minor.
So it's administrative,
Okay.
which means it doesn't go to the
Okay.
council.
So somebody made a decision that I think personally, if I were to look at it, that it's inconsistent with what this westerly buffer says. And while there may have been a justification for it, back then you said earlier that because there's a precedent set, we can't really go back and do anything. I don't know that I don't agree with it personally. I don't know if legally I can agree with it or not, but this is pretty clear to me that the buffer shall be preserved, and there were a few things that could encroach on it. Trails, water utility crossings, doesn't say water facilities, it says water utility crossings, and I don't know the legal definition of water utility crossings, but I don't think it means water tanks. And I guess I don't understand if there was an administrative decision that goes against what's actually in the development agreement, which is what we are asked to support, that someone can just say, oh, well, somebody made a decision, and therefore you have to support that decision going forward, even though it's clearly in conflict with what the development agreement says. So is it actually true that the tanks have to be approved to go into that space because the previous ones were, or can we actually state that, look, this says that that buffer needs to be preserved, and we don't believe it should be encroached on?
So I'm just going to take one step back. And Ken and I talked about this a lot, so which was nice to get a heads up. The way the development agreement is structured, there are administrative changes that are minor, and there are major changes. So I think the first piece to identify is that there are a list of things that require council action. And those are, you know, increasing the number of residential units, changing the affordable housing, et cetera. And there's maybe 8 of them. And you're familiar with the kinds of things that go in there. And sometimes the required elements are listed as a major change, and they were not listed as one of the major modifications. So they could be changed as an administrative change. I don't think I'm going to choose to debate the criteria under which it was evaluated. I guess I'm just going to say that someone in good faith made that decision based on the criteria that they believed were valid. The city acted and issued permits.
So can I restate my question then?
Sure, please.
Because an administrative minor modification was made, a decision was made, does that then create, you know, a decision in perpetuity that it has to be the same going forward? Because that could have been for that particular moment, for that particular concern, not for everything going forward. Because it seems to me that you could make some pretty major modifications over time through administrative minor modifications because someone made a decision on something in particular, not necessarily thinking about what's going on in the future.
So that's a great way of restating it. Thank you. That was helpful. And I guess what I would say is we do not identify a way in which this circumstance is materially different than the previous circumstance, in which we would say that modification does not apply to this situation.
So, okay, so then would it be out of our purview to not go with the plan, let's say, and, you know, essentially force another administrative minor modification if that were the case? So in other words, if we put a condition there that said nothing can encroach on the buffer to comply with the development agreement, I mean, I guess the applicant would then have the ability to request a modification through the process that they did that was done before, correct?
Well, they already have.
They have. Okay.
I think given
So that's why it's in here, is because they've already gone through that process?
yes, you could. You know, I don't say this lightly. I think that you could we could draft a condition for you to consider recommending to the council that those facilities be moved out of the buffer, and the council could consider that condition. I imagine there would be a lot of discussion at council.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand where our
Yeah,
lines
I
are drawn.
understand. You're trying to understand your options.
And then with respect to the character, I know you mentioned Connie's, you know, desire to see different types of homes, that sort of thing. I have those same desires, and I happen to agree with some of the stuff in the Highlands and not some of the stuff in the Highlands, but that's it's a lot of it's personal preference. It's subjective. But there are some things that are, that are not as subjective. Things like, stepping up hillsides, location of buildings, considering natural elements and so forth. And I don't know. The number and size of walls is very concerning, obviously, to a lot of us, including me. And I just don't know what other options have been put forth, and if this is purely a fiscal set of decisions. I'm sure there's a lot of things that go into it, but I guess it's all in how you read the development agreement and some of these words in here, and I don't know that it is following the agreement as we know it. I've been working on Talus for a long time now too, and this is pretty inconsistent with that plan.
Can you help me understand? Is it the walls that seem inconsistent?
I think it's just the way, particularly 7 is being developed, that it's taken into consideration the topography and the size of the land, that they're obviously maximizing what they can do there, which I don't begrudge them. That's what a business does. But I don't see it as in the character of the way Talus is being built. I don't know that I feel the same way about 8 and 9 necessarily, but I think 7 is really much more, because you've got, for me, it's a combination of things. It's the walls, it's the dead-end streets, it's the lack of, I was thinking if I was going up there shopping for a home, for example, driving down there one direction and then having to sort of figure out my way back. It's not the same as going home, pulling into your driveway, and then next day pulling out, and going back the other direction. It's the walls and the buffer. It's the water tank. It's all of those things up in parcel 7 that are making me very uncomfortable.
So I think so. A couple of things I think about. One is with the steepest topography, the range of density that if they want to build there's a certain minimum density they have to get to. And the maximum grade of the roads, they have to use walls to be able to develop there. As I understand it, they could not get any roads in without those walls. So then the question becomes whether not to develop there.
Or if there's the provision to get a modification for certain things, is there not a provision to get a modification for the minimum density?
So to go below, is it 13?
I'm just asking, I don't know.
3 to 12. So the lowest density is 3. And where are they?
So
3 what?
Dwelling units per acre, sorry.
Thank you.
You need units?
So the parcel is, I think, roughly 11 acres. So the minimum density that would support would be roughly 33 homes.
Mm-hmm.
So they're proposing, I think, 53 or 56. If they took that up to the 12, that would put them over 100 units. So that's kind of the range that they're working with.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is if you're saying that to meet that range, certain walls and roads have to be built, but if the range was changed, could it be more aptly developed relative to the...
We have a process to reduce down ranges. I'm just unclear how that looks because they're already at the lowest range that we have.
Well, I think what Jeff is saying is what would happen if they only built 33 homes, right, for instance, or if they made a request to modify it below the 3 dwelling units.
Because they're not on the low end of the range if that's the range, right? The low end of the range would be 33, not 53.
Right.
Or 56.
Yeah, they're in the lower third or something like that, right? But it's not as low as it could go.
I guess, again, I'll restate my question now is, what would it take for them to be able to, how many units would it take for them to be able to do this without having that size of wall, I guess is the question.
Well,
And I know it's not that simple. There are a lot more factors to it. I get it. But I just don't, I don't know if there are other options here.
So, do you have anything you want to add? I mean, I have something I could say, but I just want to know if you have anything you want to add. Okay. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking that the depth of the lots isn't likely to change. In other words, from the wall to the road to the red wall to the road to the green wall, as we go up the hill, that's a pretty standard depth for a house. So if they were reducing the density, they potentially are widening the lots. The question is, so I mean, I just don't, it might reduce the walls. It would not eliminate the walls. And so the question is it the height of the walls, or is it the presence of the walls? Because I'm not sure that the presence of the walls is inconsistent with the development agreement, or
well, my personal opinion, it's not the presence of the walls. I recognize walls will need to be built. For me, it's the height, the length, and the fact that, and again, not in our purview necessarily, but the fact that this stuff is sort of being thrust upon the community. We have no precedent on what a 50-foot wall might look like from a maintenance standpoint 3, 5, 10, 20 years from now. And I don't know that that's fair to put it on. If I were a resident there, I'd have the same exact concerns. So,
Jeff, question,
yeah.
And this is for you. Is it that one wall?
Mostly it's that one wall.
Because
and then
I think it is for me,
yeah.
Probably is, I was guessing. It's that one wall.
And the buffer.
And I'm glad you narrowed it down, in the buffer, but just focusing on the wall for a second. I like that you narrowed it down to parcel 7 because I was sort of struggling with what it is. And it's those issues on parcel 7. Move the water tanks out of the buffer as an example, eat into one of the lots if you need to do it, but it can come down. You're still going to have, I would presume they're above everything else, so they still have the head to flow for fire protection, et cetera. I think there needs to be some restudy on parcel 7 and what to do. And I love the creativity of, well, let's look at other things that we can modify because, when Jeff said, do you have any questions? I don't. I sort of have statements. Sorry, I'm just jumping all over you now. But, we've been told and trained, look at the goals, the vision, the standards, the guidelines and everything. And what we're seeing now does not match goals, standards, visions, guidelines for this urban village. And we've admittedly, despite one of the gentleman's comments about Issaquah Highlands versus Talus, and look, I said 2 weeks ago that Talus didn't meet a lot of visions of an urban village. This is making it worse, not better.
So in the interest of time, I mean, I think this conversation could go on quite long. I don't really know what our options are at this point, but, should we be tabling this meeting or extending the meeting to another week?
Well, I think if you would indulge us, I would like to take another recess and talk to the applicant for a few minutes about some of these options that we're hearing, some of these concerns you're hearing and some of the options that we're considering to see whether we should, what we might recommend in terms of moving forward.
Okay.
Would that be acceptable? Just like 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's do it. 5-minute recess. Thanks. All right, welcome back. All right, guys, we're back on. Let's go ahead and move on.
Hi.
Hi.
So what the applicant would like to propose for your consideration is approving parcel 9 and parcel 8 as shown and conditioned through the staff report in the memo, and modifying parcel 7 to reduce the wall, that eastern wall height by 10 feet so that it's consistent with other walls in the plat and Talus, and moving the tanks out of the western buffer.
The
No,
proposed
no,
tanks?
the proposed.
Not the current ones. You get to help move them.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, commission, discussion, thoughts? First of all, thank you for bringing that back to us.
Yes, thank you, Lucy, and the applicant. So clarification on what you're proposing. Are we tabling 7 for now, and would we just be voting on 8 and 9 if we were voting?
So that is an option, to vote just on 8 and 9. They are proposing that you vote on all 3 with a condition that 7 be modified to reduce the eastern wall height by 10 feet and move the 2 proposed tanks out of the western buffer.
So how and why can this 10-foot drop occur without other changes?
Without materially affecting what we see and what we think we'd be voting on would be the extra part of that question.
Well, I'm just wondering why it can change now. Yeah. Yeah, did something else change?
Essentially a double basement.
To put it on the record, Mr. Irvin, there are daylight basements in which they can, they did not want to restrict the home types to the extent they would. But in response to the concerns that they've heard tonight, they are willing to use a building type that takes up grade through the house and uses daylight basements so that they're able to reduce the wall height by 10 feet.
Okay.
And yes, to move the tanks out of the western buffer would likely impact those westernmost houses. But we sometimes do lose a lot or gain a lot between preliminary plat and final plat. So I don't think the change would be so significant that you wouldn't recognize the plat.
Okay. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's certainly important that we do what's right here in light of the comments and feedback that we've received this evening. So I think it's a great move from the perspective of being accommodating, so that's very much appreciated. I guess I'd like some further context in regards to back to the wall again, of a 10-foot drop to bring it in line with other standards or other wall heights. What's the max height currently for existing within Talus for our reference and understanding?
35, I think it was, right?
I think it's in the neighborhood of about 35 feet.
Mike, is that the one that's in the northeast, that little notch in the northeast corner, where Eric is pointing, my assistant?
Walls here, and then also we have a wall that's pretty high going up down this road. I'm not sure.
There's some, and
this one here is pretty high.
And the wall just north of Talus Drive. So come down to Talus Drive.
Oh, okay.
If you travel, no, that's on Talus Drive, go to the east, yeah,
Okay.
and about there. If you go up towards that plat that's just north of that, yeah, where your pen is kind of pointing, there's a pretty tall wall there as well. It's 35 feet. So, so 35 is a pretty typical.
That's totally hidden, isn't it?
Well, is that bad?
Huh?
Is that bad that it's
No,
hidden?
I'm just saying that.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it.
I
You
don't
wouldn't
know
know
how
it
to
unless you were
notice that.
walking along it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that at the same length in comparison? So it's 2 factors. It's 2 factors for consideration and understanding here, one of which is total elevation. The second is the length of the wall, right? I think those are the 2 key elements, Jeff? Team?
Chairman Walker, could I just?
Sure. Go ahead, Al.
The easterly wall of 5D would be almost exactly the same length and approximate height, almost exactly the same to what is being proposed as a change.
Okay.
Is that this wall? Yeah.
Mike, why don't you bring up that picture? Picture of the four walls, the vignette. Lower right.
No. No, that's Copper Ridge.
This is all football wall, but that's not the one he's
But
talking
it's not
about.
the one I'm talking about.
But it looks like that.
But it looks like that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's in that scale.
Scale. Okay. Carl, did you have anything?
I'll wait till Lucy comes back to us. I'll wait till Lucy comes back to us.
Thank you. We're drafting over here.
I know. And to maybe mitigate some of the drafting, I'd like to propose to you and to staff that we make a motion on 8 and 9 and table 7 and come back to the next meeting and look at parcel 7 and see what we have for parcel 7 and split those up if that's possible.
So the one challenge is that we already have something scheduled for the next meeting, which is the training session, and I'm not sure whether we can reschedule that.
We've proven that we can adjust our schedules.
So that's true. We could have the training the first hour and focus on the rest of the plat the second.
And I'm thinking not only
2 hours.
Not only. Thank you very much. That's not only fairness to us, that's fairness to you and the applicant to do due diligence and to receive any more public comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
I would support that. I'm just not comfortable with 7 yet. I really appreciate the moves that you've made there to mitigate that a little bit, but I think everybody probably needs a little bit of time to think about it.
Yeah, and I guess part of my concern is just, I want to make sure that, all possibilities or all, different designs have been exhausted, that we've looked at everything. I mean, Jeff brought up earlier possibly, doing this with the wall and what happens to density and things like that. And it was great how you guys came up with, we can trim off 10 feet in 10 minutes. That's a foot per minute. So let's see what we can get after a
Imagine we can do it
couple
24
weeks.
hours, yeah.
That's right. So
We'll be digging underground.
Yeah, my feeling is that just maybe we can even come up with more. I'm not comfortable with voting on anything with that parcel either right now.
Okay, so Lucy, what do you think?
So we have so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of edits to the motion, and then I'm going to put it on the document cam so we can look at it and you can let us know if we need to do further edits. Okay. So now my handwriting comes into play. Nope. Okay, so the first edit is this one up saying that we're approval to the City Council of the Talus parcels 8 and 9 preliminary plat, file number blah, 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 tabling parcel 7 to a future date, and is described and evaluated in the staff report, etc. Then there are the 2 conditions that were edited that Mike showed you in his slides. Then condition 7 has an edit in response to Carl's comment, which is encourage landscape being located below, between, above the walls, and eliminate the word from. Revising condition 8. Hold on, I'm going to pull this out. Close your eyes. It gets really nauseating. Oh, no. I wanted to make sure we hadn't edited condition 8 twice. So, a good laugh is so welcome at this hour. So adding the sentence to condition 8, additionally, coniferous trees shall be provided on the downslope side of the wall in order to better screen walls by that portion of the open space. And then there are 2 more conditions on the back, or 1 more condition on the back, which is a new condition 28. Road A in parcel 7 shall be designed to terminate with the final house. Any further extension of the road is subject to an approval by the council, subject to annexing the parcels to the north that are within the city's potential annexation area. Oh, we don't. Okay, we can scratch that one. How's my manicure? So were there any further edits?
Scott had a really great question. You want me to channel you, or do you want to do it?
I can speak, thank you. So my question is, I believe from our first conversation, the call out was that the water towers were to be installed prior to initiation of construction. Am I recalling that correctly?
Not quite.
The occupancy, they need to have
Right.
a place for CO, right?
So where I'm angling with that is, if we're tabling 7 at this time, do we need to make any modifications in reference to that?
I think the
Doesn't 8 either? No, it's just for parcel 7.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so any questions or concerns on that chicken scratch? Sorry.
No, it's
I'm kidding.
totally fair.
Yes?
If we're striking 7 throughout, would we not want to adjust the header as well as, I think it was on page 2 as well? There was reference to.
Motion for approval, Talus, parcel 7 and 9.
Oh, down at the bottom, yeah.
Actually, at the top, too.
Top and bottom. Mm-hmm.
Anywhere where it says 7 and 9.
It is an application for 7.
And we're just
Okay.
table.
Oh, all right, that's fine. You're right, it is.
My bevy of lawyers to prepare findings of fact and conclusion to review.
While Lucy's doing that, I just want to clarify, we do have 4 regular members and 3 alternates up here tonight. And of course, with this commission, the alternates' voices are equally important and their opinions are appreciated. At this time, though, I think voting 4 gives us a quorum, correct? So you can vote for posterity or abstain if you wish, but we will not be counting the votes. Okay, thank you.
I mean, if we're going to come back to 7 and this is a permit for 7, 8, and 9, can we vote on 8 and 9?
We can vote on this.
All right. Am I reading it?
Well, if you don't want to move, then you can't read it. So from top to bottom?
Top to bottom.
Top to bottom, thank you very much. I have a motion for approval, Talus parcels 7 through 9 preliminary plat. I move that the Urban Village Development Commission recommends approval to the City Council of the Talus parcels 8 and 9 preliminary plat, file number PP 14-00001, tabling parcel 7 to a future date, as described and evaluated in the staff report dated March 25th, 2014, and plat drawings received February 19th, 2014, briefing response memo dated April 1, 2014, and subject to the conditions therein and amended tonight. New condition number 27. Any previously cleared land shall be replanted with native, non-invasive trees and plants prior to the acceptance of open space and recreation tracts by the Talus Homeowners Association. Additionally, the applicant must prepare a plan for the removal and prevention of established invasive plant species within open space areas. The city must approve the plan, and it must be implemented prior to the acceptance of any open space and recreation tracts. Revised Construction Condition 54. Any tract in this plat whose primary purpose is open space and which has been cleared shall be landscaped to prevent erosion and to enhance the overall appearance of the community. Landscaping shall include shrubs. Sorry, lots of strikeouts here. Landscaping shall include shrubs and hydroseeded ground cover mix. Sorry. Trees selected shall either not be tall at maturity or shall be located to frame rather than block views. So far, so good? Yeah. Just checking. Do you need me to reread it? Where did I miss trees? Oh, there it is. I will amend that. Landscaping shall include trees, shrubs, ground cover mix. Trees selected shall either not be tall at maturity or shall be located to frame rather than block views. Condition number 7 revised. Encourage landscape being located below, between, and above the terraced walls. Revised Condition 8. Presence to pedestrians. Additionally, coniferous trees shall be provided on the downslope side of the wall in order to better screen walls by that portion of open space. And I move that the Urban Village Development Commission direct the Development Services Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review and approval by the UVDC, Chairman affirming the UVDC's decision to move the Talus parcels 8 and 9 preliminary plat, file number PP 14-00001, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report of March 25, 2014, briefing response memo of April 1, 2014, and as amended tonight. So,
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second? Seconded by Scott. We'll now take a vote. All in favor of the motion in place tonight? Raise your hand. Aye. The records show that 3 regular members and 3 alternates voted, and all opposed? Oops, sorry. Nay. 1, Michael. All right, and so the motion passes. Thank you.
Do you want clarification on the no vote? I'd like to push this together as a total package instead of splitting it off. I don't want 7 to slip around the commission, and then I still have some concerns about the length and height of the wall and the dead end in parcel 7, even though it has been amended.
Thank you. And so one question, though, because we split it up and approved the 2 pieces, the third one will come. It still is part of one large application, right? Or is it? Okay. Okay. Your microphone.
So tomorrow morning, we are going to look at that and look at that question of whether we're sending the whole thing forward to the council, whether we can make the schedule work to do that, or whether we'll have to send it in 2 separate pieces.
Personally, I think if we can send it as one, I would prefer that too, but I was not, obviously we weren't comfortable approving that tonight. So, okay, well, thank you to the commission, and thank you to all the public that spoke and shared their concerns. Thanks to the applicant and all the participants, and to the staff. So at this time, I'd rather not get into additional business unless there's something urgent. Next meeting is 2 weeks from now, correct? 3 weeks from now. Long month.
May 6th is the
May
next
6th,
meeting,
okay.
and we will have our new commissioners.
Right, okay. Any further business? All right, meeting is adjourned at 10:28.